Good day everyone. I hope you have a nice day. So now let's talk about the victims of abuse. Victims are referred to as females or children in this presentation because the overwhelming majority of victims are women or children. Physical battering is not the only form of abuse. Emotional and sexual abuse, including insults, intimidation, threats, and forced sex are also part of an abusive relationship. Physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of women and children should be seen as a serious social problem resulting in cross-generational perpetuation of violence. What is abuse? Abuse is treating a person or an animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. There are many kinds of abuse like physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, mental or emotional abuse, financial abuse, and lastly, spiritual abuse. Let's proceed now to physical abuse. It is the use of physical force against someone in a way that endangers that person. Domestic abuse rarely starts at physical assault. Perpetrators will use physical abuse when they feel they are being challenged. Examples of physical abuse are punching, hitting, biting, kicking, burning, murder, throwing, pulling hair, using weapons, suffocating someone, nipping, squeezing, and many more. Causes of physical abuse are fracture, redness of abused area, burn marks, scars, head injury or injury to internal organ. So let's proceed now to sexual abuse. Any situation in which someone is forced to participate in unwanted, unsafe, or degrading sexual activity, even in it's with a partner, the person is also having consensual sex, is sexual abuse. Sexual contact includes rape or forced penetration, sexual assault like vaginal, anal, or oral. The next is sexual assault using objects, sex toys, broken glass, bottles, and many more. Next is forcing sex in ways that hurt or following a physical beating. Forcing sex with others, forcing sex in front of others, making her watch or mimic pornography, unwanted fondling, and also videoing or photographing her doing sexual acts. Sexual abuse in children. The child may exhibit various physical complaints like various ache and pain, gastrointestinal upset, changes in bowel and bladder habits, nightmare, and acts of aggression and hostility. In most of the cases, the diagnosis is made by the history of the child. Result of sexual abuse includes infection, genital injury, abdominal injury or pain, constipation, chronic or recurrent urinary infection, and lastly, behavior problem. So let's now proceed to psychological abuse. It includes verbal, emotional, and mental abuse. The abuse can use both verbal and non-verbal communication. The impact of psychological abuse is often deeper and longer lasting than physical abuse. Example of this is name-calling, constant insults, shaming or humiliating her in public with put-downs disguised as jokes, nasty, hurtful sarcasm, and also accusing her of unfaithfulness, not trying to enough or purposely doing something to annoy, blaming her for his failures or other forms of abuse, screaming and shouting at her in private or in public. So now let's proceed to emotional abuse. Emotional and mental abuse is subtle and in some cases victims don't recognize they are being abused. This kind of abuse will wear victims down, often over a long period of time, until they take responsibility for their abuser's actions and behavior towards them, or simply accept it. Various emotional abuse are verbal abuse such as humiliation, scapegoating, unrealistic expectation with belting, erratic discipline. Causes of emotional abuse are depressed, anxiety, and also afraid. So now, let's go to financial abuse. In addition to hurting victims emotionally and physically, perpetrators may also hurt them financially. Example, controlling all the finances, not allowing her to see any bank statements, bills, or any financial transactions, stealing or selling her possessions or taking money. Next is preventing her from working or choosing her own career. The perpetrator refusing to work or contribute to the financial running of the family and the house, making her beg for money, and also exploiting her assets for his personal gain. And lastly, spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse can be hard to detect, especially if you are not knowledgeable in that particular religion, culture, beliefs, and tradition. Example, using her religious or spiritual beliefs to manipulate her. Next is using religious teachings or cultural tradition as an excuse for violence, forcing her to do things against her beliefs, and also forced marriage. Here are the reasons why person became abusive. So first, they have a disorder. A small number of the population is antisocial personality disorder or sociopath or psychopath, and also sadistic. These disorders gain pleasure from seeing others in pain and even more pleasure when they are the ones inflicting the agony. For them, abuse is a means to an end. They abuse others to gain personal pleasure. The second one is they were abused. Some abusers act out their dysfunctional behavior on others because it was done to them. In a subconscious effort to resolve their own abuse, they do the same to another person. This type of abusive behavior is identical, meaning it matches almost exactly to their childhood experience. The third one is they were abused part 2. Just like in the previous explanation, they abused because it was done to them. However, in this case, the victim is the opposite. For instance, a boy who is sexually abused by a man might grow up to sexually abuse girls as evidence that they are not homosexual. The reverse can be true as well. The fourth one is they watch something. With the advances in technology comes additional exposures at a young age to glorified abuse. Some movies, songs, TV shows, and videos minimize abuse by making fun of it or making it seem normal. A typical example is verbally attacking on another person by name, calling, or belittling. The fifth one is they have anger issues. Uncontrolled and unmanaged rage frequently produces abusive behavior. The source of this anger varies, but is usually tied to a traumatic event. Unresolved trauma sparks anger when triggered by a person, circumstances, or place. Because this anger comes out of nowhere, it's that much harder to control and manifest abusively. Next is they grow up with an addict. An addict blames others for the reason they engage in their destructive behavior, while the victims are often forced to remain silent and acceptant of their behavior. The end result is a lot of pent-up anger and abusive behavior. As an adult, the victim subconsciously seeks out others to blame for their actions. The next is they have control issues. Some people like to be in charge. In an effort to gain or remain in control of others, they utilize inefficient means of dominance such as bullying or intimidation. While forced control can be quickly executed, It does not have lasting qualities. True leadership is void of abusive techniques. The next is they don't understand boundaries. Abusive people tend to lack in the understanding of where they end and another person begins. They see their spouse, child, friend as an extension of themselves, and therefore that person is not entitled to have any boundaries. The lack of distance means a person is subject to whatever the abuser decides. The next is they are afraid. People who do and say things out of their fear tend to use their emotions as justification for why another person needs to do what is demanded. It is as if the fear is so important or powerful that nothing else matters except what is needed to subdue it. And next is they lack empathy. It is far easier to abuse others when there is no empathy for how the victim might feel. Some types of head trauma, personality disorders, and environmental traumas can cause a person to lack the ability to express empathy. They are exhausted. When a person reaches the end of rope, it is not uncommon for them to lash out at whoever is conveniently close. Think of it as a mental breakdown where all the things stuffed inside come pouring out, usually in a destructive rather than constructive manner. The next is they are defensive. Defense mechanisms such as denial, projection, regression, and suppression are utilized when a person is backed into a corner. Instead of taking space, they come out swinging and retaliate in an abusive manner. And lastly, they have a personality disorder. Just because a person has a personality disorder does not mean that they will be abusive. However, the lack of an accurate perception of reality greatly contributes to abusive behavior. If a person is unable to see their behavior as abusive, then they will keep doing it.